Imagine waking up one morning to a world where every choice you've ever made begins to echo back at you not as memories, but as questions. Why did you choose this path and not another? Why did you follow a voice that wasn't yours? Why did you become this person instead of creating the one you were meant to be? You stand in front of a mirror, but what reflects back isn't you, it's a mosaic of borrowed faces, expectations of others, cultural scripts, family hopes, fears disguised as wisdom. The lines on this mirrored image are sharp and unforgiving, almost mocking. And as you stare, the unsettling truth creeps in at some point. Without realizing it, you stopped becoming and started obeying. This is the quiet tragedy Friedrich Nietzsche tried to warn against. Not with gentle whispers, but with thunder. Become who you are. But how does one become when the world constantly tells you what to be? How do you carve your own shape out of a life already molded by unseen hands? There's a paradox here. Every human longs for freedom, yet most live as prisoners of inherited identities. We think we choose, but often our choices are echoes, reflections of someone else's desires, someone else's idea of who we should become. We build our lives like actors in a script written before we were even born, mistaking performance for creation. And here lies the silent danger. If you do not create yourself, something else will. And what's created in your place may not have your soul. So the question isn't whether you will shape your existence, but who or what will do it if you don't. Because, as Nietzsche's challenge burns through the ages, it doesn't come as an invitation. It comes as a warning. Create yourself or be destroyed. This is where the journey begins, not in the world outside, but in the storm of your own becoming. You were not born with a script in your hands. Yet from the moment you arrived, the script began writing itself around you. A name was given. Roles were assigned. Invisible lines were drawn, teaching you what to believe, what to desire, what to fear. You learned the language of approval before you learned the language of your soul. But here's the unsettling truth. Most people never question the origins of the person they've become. They confuse inheritance with identity. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche understood this trap with ruthless clarity. In a world terrified of chaos, society hands out ready-made masks. The dutiful worker, the loyal believer, the obedient child, the polite citizen. And we wear these masks with pride, not realizing that each one slowly suffocates the wild, unshaped force within us. Apart, Nietzsche called the will to power, not as domination over others, but as the burning force to become. Psychologically, this force is buried early. You learn to please instead of to question. You seek validation instead of truth. Your inner voice, once a roar, becomes a whisper beneath the weight of expectations. And little by little, you trade your potential for belonging. The psychiatrist Carl Jung spoke of the persona, the social mask every individual wears to function in the world. It is not inherently evil, it's necessary. But when the mask hardens and fuses with the face beneath, the true self disappears behind it. We start believing we are only the mask. And worse, we fear removing it. Beneath this mask lives what Nietzsche called the Bermenschnott, a superhuman, but the self-created individual. One who tears through inherited values and builds meaning from the raw material of their own will. But most never meet this deeper self because they are trapped in what Nietzsche called herd morality, a psychological cage made of collective comfort and silent conformity. Philosophically, this isn't just about rebellion against society. It's about confronting the terror of freedom. To create oneself means to strip away everything that was handed down unquestioned. It means standing naked before existence without the crutch of inherited values. And that, for most, is unbearable, because freedom is not gentle. It doesn't comfort, it confronts. So we build cages out of certainty. We cling to the familiar, even when it's hollow. We accept borrowed identities because they save us from facing the abyss of creation. And in doing so, we abandon the very thing that could make us truly alive, the act of becoming. Here lies the hidden problem. Most people will never truly live because they have mistaken imitation for identity. But this problem isn't just philosophical layered deep into our psychology. The brain seeks patterns, predictability, safety. The soul, however, seeks expansion. This creates an invisible war within you, the desire to break free, and the terror of what lies beyond the cage. And so, we wear the mask. We play the part. And we convince ourselves that this is enough, but it isn't. You can live an entire lifetime without ever realizing you've been living inside someone else's story. Every morning, you wake up, go through your rituals, carry the weight of your ambitions, and measure your worth against invisible standards. But if you look closely, you'll notice something unnerving. The ambitions are not fully yours. The standards were not born in your mind. The rituals were scripted long before you learned to speak. This is the great tragedy Nietzsche tried to expose. When you do not create yourself, the world will create you in its own image. You think your desires are personal, but they've been manufactured through years of conditioning. You think your fears are instinctive, but most are inherited, whispered through culture, tradition, and expectation. You believe your identity is solid, but it is built on borrowed bricks, carefully arranged to keep you docile, safe, and predictable. Psychology has a term for this quiet submission: normative conformity. It's the silent force that pulls individuals toward the group, whispering, "Stay in line. Don't stand out. Be like everyone else." Over time, this whisper becomes your inner voice. You no longer need to be controlled. You control yourself. And so, the self, the real, untamed, dangerous self never emerges. You may not even realize the consequences until they have wrapped around your life, like ivy around an old house. The first sign is numbness, quiet dissonance between what you do and what you truly want. Days feel routine. Achievements feel hollow. Even your triumphs feel borrowed, like lines read from a script written by someone else. Then comes the anxiety, a vague, unnameable restlessness. You start sensing there is something more beneath the surface, something vast and unshaped, but every attempt to reach for it collides with the invisible walls of conditioning. This is what Friedrich Nietzsche called the sickness of the herdwin. The individual loses the ability to imagine life beyond collective belief. In modern terms, this is the crisis of authenticity. A world filled with people who feel disconnected not because something is missing from the world, but because something within them has never been allowed to emerge. And here's the cruelest twist. Society doesn't just encourage the mask it rewards. The obedient employee, the agreeable citizen, the well-behaved dreamer. These roles are celebrated, You get promotions, praise, status, and yet, somewhere deep inside, something withers quietly. When you bury your true self for too long, it does not die. It waits, it festers, it turns into the very shadow you begin to fear. Carl Jung described this as the shadow, the parts of yourself that have been rejected, denied, or buried. And if you ignore it long enough, it begins to rule you from the dark. This is why entire lives can unravel in midlife crises, sudden breakdowns, or quiet despair. It's not chaos coming from outside, it's the buried self rebelling. It's the soul saying, you cannot keep living as a stranger to yourself. These consequences extend beyond individuals. A society made of uncreated selves is a society without vision, a herd without shepherds, a crowd that follows but does not lead. And in such a world, mediocrity thrives while greatness starves. This is the unseen cost of refusing. Nietzsche's challenge, a life that is technically lived but never truly claimed. The masks may keep you safe. The scripts may keep you accepted. But safety is not freedom, and acceptance is not meaning. Somewhere in the silence between who you are and who you were told to be, something ancient and untamed is waiting for you to listen. Rebellion does not begin with fire. It begins with a whisper, a quiet, dangerous whisper in the back of your mind that says, "This is not who I am." At first, you dismiss it. You drown it in noise, in distractions, in the comfort of the familiar. But the whisper persists. It grows teeth. It begins to tear through the fragile fabric of the life you've carefully constructed to keep yourself safe. This is the point Nietzsche called the great turning, the moment when a person recognizes the weight of their own chains, not chains imposed by tyrants or external enemies, but the ones they forged themselves, link by link, through fear, comfort, and conformity. The first step toward freedom is brutal honesty. You must look into the mirror, not the polite reflection you've learned to accept, but the raw, unsettling face beneath it. Who are you when no one is watching? What do you actually desire when no one is telling you what to want? Which parts of you have you buried because they were too much, too strange, or too dangerous? Philosophers and mystics have said this in different languages. Liberation begins with a confrontation with the shadow. Carl Jung described it as the integration of all that has been repressed. Nietzsche called it the birth of the Bermensch, self-created individual, who dares to live without borrowed truths. But make no mistake, rebellion is not glamorous. It is not a cinematic act of defiance. It is quiet and terrifying. It means standing alone, stripped of borrowed identities, and asking what remains. For some, this means walking away from the safe paths they've spent years building. For others, it's questioning beliefs they once held sacred. Sometimes, it's as subtle as reclaiming your own voice in a world that taught you to stay silent. And rebellion is costly. When you begin to change, the world around you will resist. Not because it hates you, but because your transformation threatens the stability of the system built on your compliance. Friends may not understand. Society may label you as lost, selfish, or dangerous. The herd will always defend its pasture. But here lies the paradox. True freedom requires being misunderstood. This is where Nietzsche's challenge bites deepest. He is not inviting you to a pleasant self-improvement journey. He is inviting you to become dangerous. not in the sense of harming others, but in the sense of being ungovernable by fear and expectation. Think of the artist who rejects the market to create something true, the thinker who dares to question sacred truths, the individual who chooses authenticity over applause. These are not rebels because they scream the loudest. They are rebels because they refuse to kneel. And here's the secret most never learn. Once you begin this rebellion, you start to see how fragile the walls were. They weren't made of iron, they were made of habit. And habits can be broken. The rebellion is not about escaping the world. It's about returning to it as someone unbound. When you confront the shadow, you do not destroy it to integrate it. You become whole. This is the birth of what Nietzsche called the sovereign individual, the one who writes their own story. It is a terrifying birth, but also a sacred one. Because when you stop being who the world told you to be, you finally become who you were meant to become. And then, after the rebellion, after the storm, there is silence. Not the silence of defeat, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of standing at the edge of your own becoming. It is here that you discover the ultimate paradox. The self you were so desperately searching for was never something to find. It was something to create. This is the truth tried to carve into the world, like a wound that refuses to heal if you do not create yourself. The world will do it for you. You were born into a structure language, culture, religion, expectations, all whispering, "This is who you must be." And for most, this whisper becomes law. They live their entire lives playing characters written by others. But if you have followed the dark road to its end, if you have stared into the abyss without flinching, then you know freedom is not inherited. It is forged, and forging means destruction. To become who you truly are, you must destroy the version of yourself that was built to please, to fit in. But here is the hidden beauty Nietzsche left between the lines. This destruction is not chaos. It is a creative act, like a sculptor chipping away at the marble to reveal the figure beneath. You are not adding something foreign. You are uncovering what was buried. The abyss you feared is not your enemy. It is your mirror. The shadow you ran from is not your doom. It is your teacher. When you integrate what you once rejected, when you accept the dark corners of your being, when you finally stop apologizing for existing, you awaken something ancient, something terrifyingly beautiful. The will to become. No longer are you a passenger, no longer a reflection of expectations. You are the author, the architect, the one who stands alone, not in isolation, but in sovereignty. This is why Nietzsche's challenge is both a curse and a blessing. It is a curse because it strips away your illusions, the comforting lies that made life simple. But it is a blessing because it gives you something infinitely more powerful, the ability to stand in the world and say, "I am." Not "I am this because they said so." Not "I am this because it's safe," but simply, "I am." And here's the quiet truth most people will never face. Freedom is not something granted. It is not given by governments, religions, or revolutions. Freedom is the terrifying responsibility of becoming your own God, not in arrogance, but in authorship. To live as a created self is to walk without guarantees. There will be no script to follow, no applause to validate you, but there will be something far greater, the pulse of a life that is undeniably your own. And when you finally stand on that threshold, when you look back at the life you've shed and the world you've defied, you may realize something else Nietzsche understood deeply. To create yourself is the only true rebellion. And so the question that opened this journey returns to you like an echo. Will you let the world shape you? Or will you dare to become the one who shapes the world? The silence is waiting for your answer.